Morning. Thank you for hanging in here with us for Friday morning. I know that it's not the best spot on the agenda to be on Friday. That's what happens when you're a brand new track at reInvent. So thank you very much for joining us for the education track. I hope you will join us not just for this session, but we have 2 more sessions later in the morning for focused on education topics. So right now I am pleased to introduce our next speakers who are going to talk to you about enterprise adoption in higher education. And so we're very lucky today to have with us Ryan Fraser from Harvard, who is not just a pretty face, but also leading the cloud strategy at Harvard University. And then we also will have with us Robert Winding and Sharif Nisham from Notre Dame, and they are working together to architect the cloud strategies at Notre Dame, and also are great speakers and entertaining guys as well. So thank you very much, and please welcome them.
Thank you, Tricia, and I feel that if there is a pretty face, it's a little less pretty this morning, and I won't be able to talk too loud for all of you, so hopefully that won't bother you either. I've got that too much yelling last night. But I do want to thank everyone for showing up to here, and we're very excited to be here talking about this. I think this is really a huge time in the industry in general in terms of what's happening out there with Amazon Web Services and with the cloud in general, and certainly a very exciting time within higher education. I think there's so much potential and opportunity here, and it's very exciting to just be here and part of this as that starts to emerge. So again, I'm Ryan, and I am a director within Harvard University IT. We are the central administrative unit of IT within Harvard, and my role is kind of within the infrastructure area. And that's kind of where I happen to be working a lot with our customers who consume our traditional data center services. And this is a lot of kind of what that looks like. So lots of different customers, lots of different technology, lots of different people and processes and everything that we're involved in supporting. So it's not the hugest scale. We're certainly not Coca-Cola or Dow Jones, but it's a pretty reasonable set of infrastructure and a fairly big organization that we're working with. And we started this a couple years ago, where it kind of really began sort of, what is this cloud, and how do we use it, and what do we think about it, and where are we going with it? And it came out of the meeting of the dozen or so CIOs that we have on campus, saying we need some sort of compute-on-demand strategy, and that sounds kind of cloudish of some sort. And so that's kind of where we started, and we initially kind of started looking around at some private infrastructure, and we were finding it was taking a little bit to kind of tune it up, and we weren't sure exactly what we were trying to deliver and how we would deliver that. And at some point someone said, you know, maybe you guys should just kind of look at this Amazon thing. It might be easier to kind of try and experiment. So we said, all right, well, that sounds kind of interesting. So about 2 years ago was when we kind of first met and started engaging with them. Over that time, kind of like, sometimes I look at this and it feels fast, and sometimes I look at it and it feels slow, but there was a lot of kind of playing around and starting conversations, and we pulled together a little team of people to start looking at this. And as we did this, kind of we started to notice some momentum in some of our larger projects that we had going on, looking at our identity and access management system, a new student information system, started saying, oh, this cloud looks interesting, maybe we should look at this too. And so we built up a little more acceleration, and then after that, we got to the point of, we had a new deputy CIO who started up at the beginning of the year, and he said, let's look at a number of different things that I think are important that we should really focus on, and one of those was cloud and DevOps. So we formed a work group and brought together a number of people to start looking at kind of what is our strategy and how do we think about this. And the big moment, and this is the purple line here, came in July at our annual, I guess, quarterly town hall that we have, sort of reviewing the last fiscal year, setting up for the new fiscal year. And this is the slide that our CIO put up on the screen. And I think she actually surprised a lot of people that right there in the middle of it was the statement that sort of 75% of existing applications and all new applications would be in the cloud in 3 years. So this was a very galvanizing moment. And going back to this slide, kind of really kind of what's happened since then is really kind of starting to bring together kind of this core team and sort of say like, okay, I guess this is serious and real. We better start figuring out how we're going to make this happen. So I think kind of the question of, why does Harvard want to do this? What do we think we're going to get out of this? It's not just cloud for cloud's sake. The first two of those I won't talk about much. It's kind of what everyone talks about, and it's sort of motherhood and apple pie at this point in terms of cloud adoption. The second ones, I think kind of one thing that we've been trying to focus on is not reducing cost, but reducing the unit cost of the services that we provide. And I think that's a really important distinction, and I think this has a lot to do with the amount of demand that we've seen and just how that has exponentially grown over time. And I certainly know that we are not getting exponentially growing budgets in order to serve those needs. And so what we've really been kind of focusing on is this isn't necessarily going to save us money, but what it is going to allow us to do is really focus on delivering more value and being able to keep up with that demand without breaking the bank. But the one in the lower right-hand side is actually one of the most important parts of this. And I think it really is kind of a critical element of this, is that actually we're using this to drive and transform a lot of the cultural elements within the organization. And really changing from being a technology-focused organization where we're trying to give you disk and give you storage and give you VM, to what are the services that we're trying to provide. And we're really kind of changed kind of out over the time as we've grown and we've built kind of big systems that we've managed, and we've actually kind of pulled in some additional units, and we're combined some of our central IT and our main college IT. We're a big organization and we've become very siloed. We're not very good at working with each other. We're not very collaborative. Work takes a long time as it has to traverse through a dozen different silos, and then you got to have lots of meetings. And so a lot of this we're thinking about not only about sort of how do we just make stuff better, it's really how do we deliver better services? How do we organize ourselves in order to deliver better services? And how do we make good teams that can be really focused on delivering value to the organization? So that's a lot to do. And there's a lot to kind of think about in how you do this. Technology. I'll spend no time here because presumably you've mostly spent most of this week learning about all the things involved there. But there's a lot there, and it's hard and it's different. But it's probably not quite as hard as thinking about, okay, well now how do I do all the process component of this? And I think this is where you start looking at the enterprise adoption component of this, of sort of like, great, so Netflix can maybe run some very focused stack of things that are all around a single thing. Coca-Cola can put in a whole bunch of websites around marketing. They're narrow, but as we start to, and as other organizations obviously out there start to say, this isn't just about a thing, it's about this whole broad mishmash of stuff that wasn't purpose-built for the cloud, runs on legacy infrastructure, is highly intertwined. How do we figure out all of the processes around being able to support that at scale as well? So that's a very key component of that, and I think that's a challenge of thinking about how do we break this problem up. But the hardest part, I think, is really the people. And it's not people in the sense that we have a lot of people who are like, this cloud is dumb and it's going to go away and we're not interested. But there's a huge amount of change. There's a huge amount of technical skills that you need to build. You need to kind of build entirely new capabilities that really weren't present in the organization in terms around things like being an IT broker or vendor management or contract management. There's a lot of roles that we just traditionally haven't had and haven't needed that we're going to need to develop. How do you organize around all of that? That's a big change. As I said, as we pivot to this service model from being a technology model, what is the best organization, and how do you actually affect that change? I think we're very different in higher ed than a lot of the business community, where you might be a little more brutal about some of those changes. I think we have a commitment to our people, and how do we help get them where they need to go? And those bottom two things, the collaboration and most importantly, trust. Those are really key things, and I think that's kind of a lot of what we're trying to do. And so this is hard work, and there's no doubt about it. And it's a significant change. I think especially kind of for those of you who are here, kind of out in the front of that, there are best practices emerging, but they're still very limited, and there's still a lot you need to do in order to figure out how does this work in my institution and with what I'm trying to achieve. And because of that, there's so many options to think about. So this is hard, and I think you need to kind of think about and also think about the culture that accepts hard work, that accepts that fail-forward mentality, and how you make that happen. So a little more kind of tactically on sort of how we're thinking about this. So we've identified kind of essentially 4 transition teams. We haven't formed all of these, so this is still in some ways a bit of our theory about how we do this, but we're kind of our current working principles. Really looking at this in a component of a team that sort of focuses on sort of the service strategy. That's kind of a bit of what I'm doing, kind of like how do we think about vendors, how do we choose which cloud we're going to, should we keep it internal, sort of what are the services there and that component. A cloud architecture team, really thinking about, so for a given cloud environment or how do we do the networking? How do we set up VPCs? How do we design kind of all of these things? How do we integrate into our monitoring services? A DevOps platform team. This is all about DevOps. I mean, I think someone has made the interesting comment that they've heard almost nothing about DevOps at this conference because it's all been about DevOps. And then it's just been, then this is how you use the cloud. And so we're really thinking about, okay, what does that mean? And kind of you'll see here this notion of a platform. And I think we're even asking ourselves, is it a platform in the traditional sense of a piece of software that we build and everyone has credentials to and uses? Or is it a framework? And actually kind of where we're hiding right now is this notion of it's almost like an open source project where people collaborate and contribute in ideas, and there is some technology and there's some best practices that individual teams can pull out and use. So we're still trying to iterate and evolve on that. And then finally, once all of this stuff gets out there, we need some way to think about operations. And I think it's a little less about operations as, you know, a big group who does the operations, and more as how do we build operations services that all of the service teams can plug into and use and be able to provide a lot of their own operational support more than a big operations team that does that independently. So from a future state, kind of our organizational thinking around this is really harnessed in that green column there of sort of all of these service teams. And really the notion that what we're trying to do is break down kind of all of these services that we have into a set of service teams that are kind of repeatable and sort of look somewhat similar, that able to run their own thing, sort of the Amazon 2-pizza model, if you will. And then within kind of a service tower, so we kind of aggregate them around things like student service and administrative services, IT services, other areas like that, have some shared pool within that. So in order to support the fact that not every service team can support every role that's needed, but still trying to keep a pool of people as close as possible to the service delivery area. And then sort of, again, kind of the groups that I mentioned there in the middle orangish and the gray on the side, sort of the ones that are supporting all of these processes, they are themselves service teams as well in that same model. But we've called them out here for what they're doing. So this is kind of our idea. And we do have a nice glossy, and unfortunately I wasn't as clever as the Notre Dame people to print and hand it out. But a lot of this stuff is on the website. You can find, if you Google it, Cloud and Harvard, I'm sure it'll come up easily. And we'll be adding some of this. So what can you do? And what should you do when you go back to your home institutions and you think about this more? This isn't everything, but I think these are a lot of things that I think you really need to start doing this. And a couple things on this slide that I want to pull out. First, learning is important, and just getting down and trying this stuff. This is so different, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and you need to get your hands into it and understanding it, because it's a very big change from what people are used to doing in a lot of levels. So just start trying and experimenting, get some of that stuff in. The foundational components, there's a lot of different things there, but I think not having these in place will not necessarily, they're not going to kill you, but I think the more you can solve some of these problems and at least be thinking about them early on, the better position you're going to be in for success, just because they help make the adoption easier, they help keep things a little more coordinated when you start, and I think they can make it a little bit better in terms of how you're able to scale this out as you grow. But it really is that bottom one there of collaborative change management, and by that I really mean the sort of organizational element of this, of figuring out how do you work together with all of your colleagues, whether they're in storage or networking or an application developer or in enterprise systems. How do you work with your security teams? How do you work with your auditors? How do you work with your customers? And sort of like, how do you start kind of engaging with them in different ways and building that trust and building those collaborative relationships and working really hard in order to do this, because this is going to be a lot of tough work and it's going to take a lot of time, and you're going to need to spend a lot of energy in order to make this happen. And I think that's kind of the critical message, is figuring out, start bringing people together around this to build that, to build sort of those core teams that can be the evangelists out there that can start making this change happen. It's going to take time, and at times it gets a little frustrating, but I think, you know, at the end, I think I continue to step back and think of the opportunity that we have here, and the opportunity to deliver value to our researchers, to our faculty, to our students, to kind of society in general, and I think there's a huge amount here, and so there's a lot of feeling of that kind of responsibility in order to make this happen and to really drive this forward. So with that, I will turn it over to our friends from Notre Dame, but certainly thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Bob Winding. I'm one of the IT architects at Notre Dame, so I've been involved pretty much from the beginning in Notre Dame's cloud efforts. So we began our journey with kind of a precipitating event. We had some things were happening around the higher ed community, some that were very tragic, and it led our senior administration to do look at a lot of ways that we were communicating emergency information. And we were also concerned generally about our website's resilience and its ability to scale. So we ran some tests. This is probably in the summer of 2012. And we basically failed in a number of ways. We couldn't support the anticipated volume of a major attracting event coming to our website. And we also had a kind of a disaster recovery site that we used in the event of an IT event. So if we had lost network connectivity that we could cut over, we shared some space with Indiana University in Indianapolis. And anyway, those processes really didn't work. So as we went to fix that, we started looking at, hey, could we take our main website and simply shift it into Amazon? Would that be a way for us to solve both of these problems? You know, we could have scalability and we could be location independent, you run in multiple availability zones, et cetera. And we engaged Amazon in a conversation to start that process. And then probably in about October of 2012, we visited Amazon, worked with some of their architects to port our website into AWS. And it took us 3 days to do that. And we were kind of excited about that. And we did really a straight port. We were using Red Hat. We ported it that way. We wound up coming back and realizing that Amazon Linux was cheaper and actually redid the whole thing a week later. So it was very approachable technology for us. And then we made the lucky decision, I suppose, to go live with it 3 days before we were in the national championship game. So we saw like a 5-fold increase in traffic during that game, and it auto-scaled and supported all of the visitors, and everything worked well for us, which is why I'm here today. Otherwise, I'd be at some other company. So we moved on from that, and we started looking at, so what other kinds of things can we do? And so we entered kind of like the experiment phase. So we looked at both, we wanted to do some projects that would be easy wins, that would have some type of demonstration of different uses of the technology. So hopefully we could look at kind of like what are the pain points? Are we going to run into trouble with this? So we looked at, the next thing we did was we had a custom content management system called Conductor that manages our 400 departmental websites. So we had been running that in Rackspace and had problems with it. We had hardware failure that caused outages. We had performance issues, et cetera. So we migrated that over to AWS. And as part of that migration, we used RDS for the backend database. So that was our kind of first venture into, okay, can we leverage that platform technology? And it worked out great. We've had way better performance. We've had virtually no outages, and we've saved probably 40 or 50%, which is pretty much true on the website as well. The next thing we did was we looked at server backups. So like many of you, we have multiple different ways of backing up. So we have a filer environment that we do snap mirroring, snap vaulting, et cetera. But we also have a net backup environment. So that backs up a couple hundred servers. So we were like, okay, can we take that net backup and simply use a different target to push it into S3? So we went and we started out with the AWS Storage Gateway, which really didn't scale to the ingest rate that we had. I think we're doing like 2 terabytes a day of change data, and we have a couple hundred terabytes of actual stored data. So we looked at different products. We looked at Riverbed and Panzura. We wound up selecting Panzura, and that's how we implemented our server backup. So Panzura is now basically our net backup target. And it was kind of interesting because our manager of storage, during an internal presentation, told everybody, hey, if, by the way, you know, anybody who's done a server backup or restored data in the last month, if you did it through net backup, you're already using Amazon AWS because we've moved all of those services, all of those backups into S3. And so it was really a seamless, transparent move that even the engineers that were supporting systems didn't know happened. We also looked at this is kind of the greenfield application, right? We had a mobile initiative, and so it seemed like a natural thing to migrate to implement our mobile environment in Amazon directly. So that was kind of a new thing for us as well. And then authentication. We started looking at all the range of services that we have, and for instance, Box and Sakai and internal use project management stuff. We have a wide range of stuff that's already in the cloud that relies on authentication. And periodically through maintenance outages or through actual failures, if we lost border connectivity, people would mysteriously lose connectivity to their apps. And Sharif and I first actually noticed this. We were doing an IT survey in a building in Rome because we have some international studies programs. And we were showing them how to transfer data and set up Box and get all of that ready for them. And all of a sudden, we couldn't access Box. And we were like, wow, what's going on? And it dawned on us, we're like, I wonder if I can, you know, get back to an internal website. And we couldn't. And we were like, wow, the border's down. So we realized, you know, what we really need to do is move our authentication into Amazon so that we're not the thing which brings down the availability of other cloud services. And for a lot of people, I think that's been an issue or a concern. So we wanted to not be that lowest common denominator of we're the point of failure in Box or Sakai or anything like that. So we went ahead and said, okay, how can we go about doing this? And so what we wound up doing was we used Route 53, and we moved domain controller, directory service, CAS and Shibboleth into Amazon. And so what happens is we're using Route 53 health checks to look at our login.nd.edu CAS service, and then if that becomes unavailable, we fail over to a secondary resolution to a login.nd.edu that exists in Amazon, and then all the infrastructure is there behind it. And the other kind of technology that we use here, this is the first time we set up customer gateway. So we use a tunnel to sync the domain controller, basically. And I'll show you later, but the domain controller then sits in a private subnet, right, that's only accessible through that link. And we'll talk about the whole VPC architecture that Notre Dame set up a little bit later. But this was another opportunity as well for us to look at RDS, and Postgres had just been announced shortly after the time we were doing this, so we wound up electing to use Postgres RDS, and that's worked out really well for us. Matter of fact, even this week, the Indiana iLight service had a maintenance window that impacted us early in the morning, and this particular system failed over, and so all of our external apps continued to function. And it's happened a couple times. Okay, Sharif will talk about a little bit how we arranged our organization and our teaming.
Thanks, Bob. So morning, everybody. I'm Sharif Nisham. I'm Bob's slightly taller, slightly balder counterpart at Notre Dame. And so I really like what we've talked about so far in the context of, you know, the technology is amazing, right? We're working with AWS, and it's like a technology fantasy kit that we've dreamed about for a long time that all of a sudden we can just use. So the technology we have a lot of confidence in. And over the course of the summer, really over the course of the past year, we spent some time working with our colleagues kind of sprinkled throughout higher ed, which is one of the best things about working in higher ed, right, is we tend to share a lot. And so we worked with our colleagues from Harvard and Stanford, and Beth Ann's here from Georgetown, and folks from Chicago and Minnesota on what some of you might have seen published out through EDU202 Center for Applied Research is a strategy for cloud adoption in higher education. So if you're an ECAR member school, that is out there on the EDU202 website. You can kind of Google cloud strategy ECAR, and it's there for you to read. And what that really kind of meant for us, we thought about it, and you all have the flyer that we kind of are using to talk about our mission internally. And so this isn't a very exciting picture, right? This is kind of a standard org chart that you all have. But I think this is a much more compelling picture, because what it tells is the story that Ryan spoke so eloquently about earlier, right? It's going to, adopting the cloud is going to take everybody in your organization, right? It's going to take people from across your organization to work together in different ways to figure out how do we actually do this. So we've actually dedicated a team of people. It's about a 2.5 pizza kind of team from these groups that are dedicated. We've set aside time for these folks, 9 to 3 every day, and 9 to 3 is our working time. So we're moving our meetings outside of those times, any external meetings, any prior job roles. We're just taking it out of hide. We're saying, look, we're committed to making our Cloud First initiative successful, and in order to do that, we're going to need to dedicate the people to it. A little bit more compelling is the Augmented Team. So one of the approaches that we're taking in the context of migrations is an opportunistic approach centered around when we do upgrades, our regular upgrade cycle. Because, so certainly our strategy, as you see, is software first. Absolutely, we're a proud Google school. We host Sakai off-site with long-site, platform next, and then infrastructure. Infrastructure is a fantastically interesting place to be because, like Bob pointed out, when we did our CMS migration, it was seamless, unknown to the folks using it, right? When we did the website, nobody knew the difference. So the real power and the thing that's so exciting about the infrastructure layer is you're not disrupting the business processes of your institution, right? You're not disrupting it. It's just like you're switching virtualization inside. If you do this right, you're not impacting how your folks are using the software. It's so exciting and compelling. And so, of course, if you have a dedicated team, the Augmented Team is really there to pull people around the time when we're doing an upgrade anyway. So for example, we use OnBase for our document management system. We know we have an upgrade coming in the spring. We're starting to plan now to figure out, okay, what do we need to do to make sure when we do this upgrade, we're going to put the dev system in AWS. We'll put the test system in AWS. So then when it comes time to our production cutover, we're there, right? And we've leveraged the investment that our functional offices are already making in the context of our regression testing, right? We don't want to put an extra burden on them. So of course, along with the dedicated team is a dedicated space. My favorite thing about this picture, I don't know if everybody can see it, but in the back left corner is like a really dark window. That's actually our primary data center. So what we've done is we've taken the space where our operators used to sit, that big console room. We've cleared that all out. We've improved the environmental so we're not freezing in there. Brought in a bunch of monitors, right, paint, all that kind of stuff. But we're there working every day, focused on waving goodbye to the equipment that's behind the glass, right? It's a tangible, palpable thing that we feel every day that just really kind of crystallizes the mission in our minds. And it's kind of fun, right? It's kind of a fun thing. And so, our shared mission is this goal, right? And the number's important, but what's more important is our central org, our motto, right, is to serve as Notre Dame's trusted technology partner. That's a mission we take very seriously. And serving in that mission means that we're dedicated to providing service excellence, IT service excellence. And it just so happens that in order to provide IT service excellence, it's our belief that this is how we'll get there over the next 3 years, right? people don't really care about what we host or where we host. What they care about is, can I use the services that you're providing, right? So it's all about the value. The technology, we have 100% confidence in, right? So, you know, how did we get there? Certainly it's been a journey of at least 2 years, right? Bob talked about that. The first thing, hearts and minds of the organization, right? There are people who are going to resist change, any change, doesn't matter. And it's been an effort over time that we've dedicated to. So we've engaged AWS in the context of training. We've sent people to training. We've brought about a dozen people to reInvent this year. That's been really, really a phenomenal experience for people because it's a unifying event. It's a unifying event, and everybody's learning together. Everybody's getting excited together, right? It's a wonderful thing to do. Building out our infrastructure foundation, Bob's going to throw up a slide at the end of kind of what that looks like, and we'll be happy to go a little bit deeper in terms of VPC configuration and peering and customer gateways and all that kind of stuff, absolutely. Migration plan. So migration plan in the context of we don't have this giant 3-year, you know, project plan of this is how we're going to move every chunk. We're taking it in about 3-month increments. Right? We're taking it in about 3-month increments saying, what can we actually do in the next 3 months? Okay, let's iterate on that. Okay, success, okay, let's move next. And this is where I have to stress that our partnership with AWS has been outstanding. So Blake Chisholm is one of our solution architects. And he's been really, really fantastic to work with because he's done these migrations in other places, right? And so he's working with us, looking through our service catalog, ensuring that we're considering things that maybe we haven't thought of, right? Because they've done this before, we haven't. It's a new thing that we're going to learn. And certainly in the context of things that we have to consider, you see that it spans the organization, right? It's affecting all the kind of columns of the organization. And so there's some natural tensions that we're still trying to figure out. So RDS and DBAs, what does that mean? We have our DBAs working on, okay, when do we use RDS? When do we not use RDS? We run Banner as our all-you-can-eat ERP. So right now that's certainly on premises. We're using Oracle RAC. That's probably not an RDS candidate. So, okay, that'll probably be an EC2 EBS candidate. On the other end of the spectrum, we have an app that we migrated last week that gets 4 hits a day. That's a great RDS candidate, right? So we're working through right now, what's the litmus test? When do we need to do something that we operate versus RDS? It's a good question. We don't have all the answers yet, but we're committed to figuring it out. So Bob's going to talk to us a little bit about things to think about before we dive into our infrastructure diagram.
So we learned a lot as we did these, half a dozen different applications and now began the migration process. And some of the things that we looked at that I think are pretty important for you to consider up front are network strategy, right? What's your IP space going to look like? How are you going to lay that out? How are you going to lay it out in such a way that you can supernet like security zones across AZs so that you can simplify security groups? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. How do you do troubleshooting? We did a lot of troubleshooting on the network level, right? We would look at span ports, or we would look at firewalls where we could watch, connection translations, or we could TCP dump on firewall interfaces to see what traffic, wasn't connecting between applications when we implemented them, right? Some of those things are lost to you now in the cloud because you no longer have access really to the network layer, right? You can't get access to a switch in Amazon. So we're instrumenting hosts. So we're trying to create that base level AMI for us where we have tools on the host to analyze traffic that we can look at. Log analysis, we're looking a lot at Splunk. We were using QRadar. So we're looking at how to better utilize those things. CloudTrail, right? All the things you have to learn to be able to, when you anticipate something, well, I'm implementing this application and I know it has connectivity back here, but it doesn't work. So where is my problem? So the analysis kind of shifts to the logs, the audit trails, and the hosts, as opposed to the network of what we were looking at originally. Then latency. There's a lot of concern for us about throughput of traffic between our campus and AWS as we do a transition. Will latency affect our applications? So we've begun to work with some edge cases. We're working on a ETL application now where both the source and target are Oracle databases on-premise, but we're running the application in Amazon. We're also doing kind of the other way around. We have a fat client application, and we're putting the database in AWS. And so we're trying to see how much flexibility do we have in splitting applications versus having to group applications with their data and move it as a whole. And so far, we've learned a few things. In this ETL application, we noticed that for whatever reason, and we're working with Microsoft on this, Windows machines, if you're sending a lot of data over a long distance, don't seem to adjust their network stack effectively, so you wind up with reduced throughput. And in our case, we're running over VPN tunnels, and on a Windows box, we'll see 16 megabits a second, for instance. But on a Linux box with properly set up receive and transmit buffers, we'll see 250 megabits a second on a single stream. So some of those things, depending on what you want to split and how you want to move stuff, you're going to have to look a little bit of the platform that it's running on, the properties of the application, and what the actual impact is to the users. We're also kind of discovered, and it's a thought process that we just came to as we started looking at things is, so if we want to do monitoring, do we open up rules or traffic paths from our current data center monitoring system to our new servers in Amazon, or do we flip that? And we kind of decided that, anytime we're in a situation like that during transition, we want to get to the point where we're running those things in Amazon, so let's just flip them. If we encounter infrastructure like that, let's just flip it. And if we have to monitor stuff back on campus, as opposed to running dual systems, then let's open the rules up the other way and monitor from systems that are in Amazon as opposed to monitoring Amazon from campus. Customer gateways, VPN tunnels, right? Certainly for transition we need this. We need it for system administration. And we're probably always going to have some level of footprint on campus. There are certain kinds of things that just don't make sense, particularly if they're, let's say like elevator control or HVAC or something like that, right? Or very high data rate stuff, video processing that we do right on campus with, say the football stadium as an example. So we're probably always going to need tunnels. And one of the things that we kind of started to realize, and probably a lot of you are in this situation, where your IP address ranges over time, right, have probably grown a little organically, so you have a mixture of public and private addresses. So you really have to start thinking about, if I have places like the College of Engineering that are publicly addressed, and they have to go through a tunnel, what's going to happen, right? Because when they get there, what happens? They're going to get sent to a default gateway, and now you have an asymmetric route, and it breaks. Fortunately, a while ago, we moved a lot of people on campus to private addressing, and that's kind of easy to do. So we also have taken kind of a strategy of saying where we can access our services publicly over public secured protocols. So if lots of our stuff is HTTPS anyway, then we're going to control our security zones with NAT pools at our border, and we're going to let those protocols go over the internet as opposed to over a tunnel. And the other thing you have to think about is sizing the equipment, which is a little bit easier problem, but sometimes it's hard to actually know what the traffic in your data center is. Like, it's very easy for us to know the cumulative traffic across security zones where it passes through a device like an ASA or another firewall. But the local layer 2 traffic, right, you don't really know what that is. So we're going to have to be careful about, as we migrate, looking that we don't split things that talk a lot. Right? And then incident response and forensics, right? How are we going to accomplish those things? So with that, I'll show you a little bit about what we came up with in terms of VPC structure. So we wanted to kind of make this as simple as we could. We were concerned about VPC sprawl, but we also wanted to separate things in a way that we thought would be flexible for departmental IT, because we have some distribution, right? Our law school, our library, College of Business, for example, have IT groups that operate some of their own infrastructure, and they're very interested in moving into this as well. So if I start out with on the lower right, you know, we have shared databases. So this is where kind of like the ERP-ish kind of databases go, because there's other people that want to access them, right? Other applications and potentially even other departments. And we can provide that access through VPC peering. Shared services is the monitoring, logging, domain services, authentication, et cetera. And anyone who needs those services, right, can do so through peering, but we don't have to worry about, it's kind of good that you can't transit zones, because then if we give, say, for instance, shared service access to the College of Business, it doesn't imply that they can go route into our consolidated applications area, which is kind of our principal data center. This is where all of our applications are deployed, and it kind of mimics the zones. Basically, we do it by exposure, so we have campus exposed applications that are more internal administrative functions, and then we have, you know, public web services in our world networks. The other thing we tried to do here is on the top, we have some applications that we really want to be as isolated as possible. We want to be as independent as possible. So to ensure that we don't create unintentionally dependencies that, you know, if we have a failure, could result in those applications going down. If we put them in a separate VPC, we have a very tight control over what those dependencies are. And the final one is a kind of independent accounts. So this is where we put College of Business, library. We create this pattern of 5 zones for them to operate their infrastructure. So they can have a set of private networks that they can do databases or RDS on, and then they can have a set of public networks that they can deliver, you know, web services over. And we use that as an independent account, and then that way it simplifies billing too, because we create that as sub-accounts under our master account, and we can easily transfer the cost to those departments. The other thing about this diagram I think that you want to consider is that if you look at the address ranges, things that are like security zones, so like for instance world access subnets, campus access subnets, and database subnets, except there's one error in the consolidated app thing that we have to fix next week. But they can be super netted, because our philosophy from a security perspective is basically to use network ACLs and security groups at the subnet level. So we'll say, like, the application tier, the database tier will trust the application tier with a security group on all database protocols. If we have a highly secure database where we say, hey, this database has sensitive data, we want to minimize the attack surface as much as possible, we're going to restrict that to that single application server, but we'll do that with host firewalls.
Yeah, and we'd be happy to talk more about the details after the session or in Q&A. But what we really wanted to kind of finish out on was the fact that this is such an incredible experience, right? It's an incredible road that we're going on, and we can't go on it alone because there are a lot of things happening. And one of the things that's happening is that we're turning higher ed IT on its head. Right now, I can't do this by myself. Everybody understands that, right? I can't do it by myself. I'm relying on my colleagues. I'm relying on my collaborators from across the nation. And I'm relying on my partners from AWS. I'm relying on Leo Z. I'm relying on Blake. I'm relying on Steve, right? This is how we're going to be successful together. So I would encourage us as a community to embrace the fact that we are a community, learn from each other. This is a well-traveled path in industry, but it is new for us. Let's do it together.
Nice job, nice job. Yes. I almost dropped them with the 80%, so.
So we'd be happy to, we have like 15 minutes. We'd be happy to talk questions, or we can take it outside too.
I think we have to go. Do we have 15?
Oh, no.
15 seconds. 10, 9.
Yeah, we've got 8 seconds for
Real quick.
questions. So.
Yeah.
Do you still use Ethernet too?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. So the question was, do we still use internet too? The answer is absolutely yes. Yeah.
One of the new announcements was most interesting to you. Was the Lambda announcement interesting, or what seemed to have the most impact on your future plans, even though you haven't had time to digest it all?
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think for me, there's a lot of opportunity I see with Aurora. I think that kind of plays with kind of one of the areas that we looked at as being particularly challenging, and how to do some of these kind of enterprise level types of applications from a database perspective. There's a lot of kind of additional questions, and how's it work, and how do vended products work with that, but that was certainly interesting. The Lambda stuff, I thought it blew my mind. I wasn't sure if it should have blown my mind, and then the Gartner guy yesterday said it blew his mind too, so I'm like, okay, I guess we can all have our mind blown by that. I mean, it seems kind of crazy. I think it's still trying to wrap your head around, like, what is this? But it has that feeling of, this is the start of IT kind of going back to the business.
Yeah, I mean, I see Aurora probably as the biggest play for us, because more and more and more, we want our shop to be an integration shop and not a development shop. So a lot of the tools that AWS is spitting out is absolutely focused on developers, as it should be. So the question is for us is, where does it intersect with what we're trying to do?
So I think we can take our questions outside now.